Hi, I am Vagrant Sam. Welcome to my channel where I talk about my faith, losing my faith, and finding myself in atheism. Now, this is a journey that has taken place over the last 15 years, since about the age 20, so I've just given away my age. Ta-da. And I want to basically put out my experiences, my thoughts, and how my understanding has shifted over the years to help inform potentially people that are currently Christians, currently theists, and helping them at least understand the atheist mindset and how one can go from being someone that speaks in tongues, that prays for healing, that believes miracles can happen, that believes in revivals, that believes in God and the healing power of Jesus to wash away our sins, to someone that is an atheist and is fairly comfortable with the idea that death is the end that comes for us all, and that there is joy and beauty to be found in the very transient and brief nature of the time that we have on this earth. And I guess I want that to be the overarching theme of my content, kind of the lighthouse that we steer by in terms of, how do you find happiness outside of faith? How do you find meaning outside of faith? Particularly for people that have been indoctrinated and that's been ingrained in them, because that's probably a pretty big barrier to moving on and actually letting that go. I believe that all Christians, for the most part, are fairly rational people, and that sometimes it only takes one or two things to not be quite lined up with reality, and it sort of opens the door to being a lot more credulous of a lot more of the other things that come with the religion. And so in that way, I don't want to be too critical of people that are Christians, and I hope to have a bit of a dialogue. And I also hope that the content to some degree will help to frame Christianity, and particularly the Pentecostal evangelical type of Christianity that my background's in, for atheists, so that they can be a little bit more aware of the type of doctrine, the type of thinking, the type of, practices that happen in those churches, because they're certainly not the sort of everyday church that you get across. My cat is joining us tonight. You'll be hearing her knocking around, so look forward to that. Anyway, on to the rest of the video. I hope you guys will stick around. Please hit the subscribe button, and if you do like the video, hit like, and make sure that if I say anything as it goes along, that you leave a comment below for me to read. And hopefully I'm going to be around on YouTube a little bit. God, that sounds horrible. I sound like a kid. Anyway, on with the video. Get out. Right, so today's video, I want to talk about a few aspects, 3 to be precise, that kind of formed the trinity of my backsliding into atheism. And the reason I want to talk about these tenets is because it's what formed the bridge from belief to non-belief for me. And I think there's some foundational ideas there that are interesting, hopefully, and could be potentially useful to people that are trying to find that bridge, if they've got any dissatisfaction with the faith that they find themselves in, and maybe help understanding for people that maybe never had faith, so that they can understand the other side a little bit more. So there's 3 things we want to go across, and I guess the first thing I'm going to get out of the way is the one that's probably a little bit more cliched than the other 2. Maybe not, depending on how you look at it. But the first thing I want to go across is the thing that really, I guess, started it all in terms of me finding a way out of religion, was starting to read the Bible in a holistic manner. Now, the key word there is holistic, because every Christian will probably put up their hand and say, yes, I read the Bible. You'll probably get some that'll admit to not reading it enough. But every Christian has a Bible they probably pick up, particularly when they start to feel maybe a little bit guilty and a little bit like they haven't been touching it enough, and get reminded on a Sunday that, hey, you should be reading it all the time. And it was common practice, particularly in my church, at least for myself and the people that I was close to at the time, that would read our Bible every night. And that usually meant I don't want to say cursory, but it was a nominal time with the Bible, in that you might pick it up and you'd read one chapter. The premise being that you would spend some thoughtful time in prayer afterwards to ask God to open up some meaning or some message that he had within that chapter for you for the night. If you've read the Bible, you know that the chapters are pretty small. We're not talking about a George R.R. Martin book where a chapter is going to take you... Bad example, I haven't read his books in probably 10 years. But they're short. And the issue with that is you're essentially taking a message out of context. So instead of reading a whole book, and obviously the books in the Bible have very diverse lengths, but you are taking things outside of the context. And there could have been a verse just at the start of the first chapter that links to the previous verse, and you kind of miss that. And that type of digestion of that content, I suppose, it makes it harder to get a holistic look at what you're actually reading and what the message might actually be. This is something that particularly stood out to me after I started attending Bible college. So I did 2 years at Bible college. I was studying a Bachelor of Theology. And the things that I learned over there, besides things like apologetics, hermeneutics, I did some ancient Greek, I did church history from sort of 0 to 1500, 1500 to 1800. So I covered a lot of stuff like the Reformation, Thomas Aquinas, the Council of Nicaea, all sorts of stuff, translating things from Greek back to English so we could sort of see how it compared with the translations that we have today. And I look fondly back on that time, but it gave me a really strong appreciation of reading the Bible textually as a historical document and taking some of the woo or some of the mysticism out of the way it would often get approached by the Christians that were around me. Remember, I'm talking about a Pentecostal faith system which believed that the Holy Ghost would literally come and inhabit a room full of believers and would cause people to speak in tongues. They referred to it as being slain in the Spirit, and you would fall over and convulse, and stuff that I participated in, stuff that I felt happened to me. And looking back on it, I sort of look at it as mass hypnosis, and you sort of set this anyway. Different content for a different video because we're going to milk that content into videos. But the more I understood it as a historical document that had a particular purpose that the authors intended at a particular time in history, the less I understood it as divine revelation, that every little individual section had something to say, and more that the whole book itself had a message. And the whole message of the Bible, when you start with Genesis, the creation, Noah's flood, and the Egypt, in terms of like the nation of Israel being in bondage and being taken out of bondage, and all the way through to Jesus, and then you bookend it with Revelation, you have a very violent and a very distasteful form of religion. And I suppose that's what really started to knock me out of it, so to speak. It's very easy to sort of quote John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever shall believe in him shall not perish but have everlasting life." I mean, God, we know everyone remembers that if you've been a Christian for any period of time, particularly if you're heavily evangelical and trying to proselytize constantly to get people saved. But people are less likely to know things like Exodus 21, which, if you've watched the Atheist experience, is the rules on how to own a slave. Or you're less likely to have people that are quoting the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. I was looking at it today because I was having messaging someone on Twitter about they had done a video which I'll link below. It's Jen's Little Corner, talking about the violent God of the Old Testament. And often that gets brushed off by believers because they go, well, no, that's the Old Testament, right? That's the God of the law, the God of judgment. Jesus came and he, it's the God of mercy, the God of love, the new covenant, not the old covenant. But you look in Revelation and you've got this vengeful old covenant style God that's here to kill and to reap and to basically destroy the world and rebuild it in paradise with their chosen people. And that includes the Lamb as well, which generally is accepted to be Jesus Christ, the Lamb who was sacrificed. Jesus Christ died on the cross. The Lamb comes, unleashes the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And so I suppose looking at the book, the Bible, which I understand it's 66 different books, but looking at it holistically as one book, because that's how it's been compiled, and that is how it is read and how it is understood in terms of theology and doctrine, really made it more difficult for me to continue to believe it was inerrant and it was literal. And the further you get from the literal Bible being literal, and that entails things like Garden of Eden, young earth, creationism, everyday miracles, walking on water, all that sort of stuff. The further you get from some of the things that we consider more silly, like young earth creationism, the harder it becomes to then also believe the things that are still pretty standard doctrine, like Jesus rising from the dead. And so hopefully that sort of explains that pendulum sort of shift for me. Like, it's probably not enough to convince someone that's currently a Christian, but I guess the main thing here is to hopefully have it so you understand how I moved from my faith. So the second thing that was paramount with me being able to move from my faith is the relationships that I had in the church. Now, this is probably counter to someone else's experience. Like, if you're heavily anchored within the social community of your church, it's probably not going to be your experience. But as someone that was converted, so I didn't actually come from a Christian family or for a Christian background. I grew up with my grandmother, and my grandmother was a spiritual person in terms of being open to the idea of the supernatural and the positive influences there that can be out there that we could tap into through various means, particularly New Age spirituality. And she was in positive of the church. Like, she felt it was a good influence on me, and so she encouraged me when I started going to youth group when I was about 13 years old. So from the age of 12, 13, I started going to church. I probably gave my life to Jesus at about the age of probably still 13. It was probably within the first year that I walked down the aisle, put my hands in the air and accepted Jesus into my heart, and was baptized by the age of 14 or so. And then over the next few years, was very active in the church. I became a youth leader. Before that, I was a children's church teacher. So I worked in the kids' church. I eventually became one of the leaders in the kids' church, quite high up. And then I became active in the youth ministry as well. So by the time I was old enough, about 16, I started taking on a leadership role, which means that kids that were like 13, 14, 15, I would help look after them. I'd help run events. I'd help run the evenings, plan activities, preach sermons. I'd have a group of guys that I would look after spiritually and teach them the ways of God and the ways of the church and things like that. So I was really active and really passionate about this. I actually went to Bible college. I did 2 years of Bible college towards a Bachelor of Theology. Granted, the second year I decided I didn't want to finish it, and I was just getting my OP up to the point where I could go over to a Bachelor of Education, which I never finished anyway. But yeah, I was dedicated. And it was while I was at Bible college, while I felt I was showing this dedication, I was also actually working in the church as a cleaner. So I'd wake up early, clean the church in the mornings and at night after the services. But my connection with the people in the church felt empty. It felt like I was in an organizational structure as a worker, and that I wasn't here as a personal, close friend. And that's probably not how anyone else saw it. But the issue was, at this point, I was actually comparing these relationships very directly with some secular relationships that I had been making. So I had friends that moved to the same city, like where I was going to Bible college was not where I grew up. A lot of the other people that I went to high school with, that I was friends with, they also went to the same city to go to universities, but they went to proper universities doing proper degrees. And I stayed in contact with them, and I began to hang out with them in concert with my church friends and church duties and stuff. And church was very much centered around, you went to youth group on Saturday night, prayer meeting on Wednesday night, you had church Saturday morning and Saturday night, so you'd spend about 5 hours at church on a Sunday. You might have music practice on Thursday or something. God, I don't remember the calendar, but you'd be pretty full up. I was lucky I had Friday nights free, so I could go and hang out with my secular friends, and some Saturdays, very occasionally. But those relationships felt like they were all premised around me being a worker for God. Like, it was about what benefit was I bringing to Christianity. It wasn't about who I am as Sam. It was about who I am as the preacher, the person that was doing something for someone. You know, what was I doing for the kingdom of God? And so it didn't feel personal to me. I felt like an outsider. And maybe that's because I was a convert into the church. And then beyond that, I went to another church in another city, which I'd only been there for about a year when I was feeling this way. And I just didn't have that strong connection, I suppose. And that's made tougher because Christianity doesn't present itself like a clique. It presents itself as a loving and a embracing religion. And to me, that I found that to be really at odds with the experience that I was kind of expecting based on the Bible and based on my preconceived beliefs of, hey, I'm doing God's work and these are God's people and we're all a loving family and we're all going to be in paradise together. And that just didn't work out. And so more and more hanging out with secular friends, they would go out to the nightclubs and I'd go out and dance because that's not a sin. At least depends on how close you dance with other people. But anyway, bare facts, it's not a sin. And I would drink my lemon lime bitters and eventually I'd be to the point where, hey, drinking's not a sin. It's being drunk that's a sin. So I'll have a Scotch and Coke and then I'll switch to the lemon lime bitters. And then eventually it's like, well, it takes 2 or 3 drinks to be drunk. So if I have 2 and then 1 every hour, kind of like what they say is to stay under the legal limit for driving, I'll be fine. And, you know, it's not a sin. It's all good. And before you know it, I was drinking and having great nights out with my mates, making really awesome memories, and finally living the life of a young adult. By this time, it was at the age of 21 or 22. But I still had a good couple of years of clubbing ahead of me, so I didn't lose it all, which was really good. But that's skipping ahead in the story a little bit. So I guess this point here, it's the relationships. I just found I had more genuine relationships with secular people. I'm not sure whether or not they were atheists, but they weren't focused around religion as their core identity. And they connected with me because of who I was, not because of a shared religion, which as much as Christians make their Christianity their core aspect of their personhood about who they are, the reality is we are more than just our beliefs about a particular God, where our personalities, where our tastes, where our preferences, where our identity, all these things that happen outside of religion, even I think for religious people. Like, for example, you can be a Christian and you can be a gourmet foodie. And, you know, I can connect with you probably quite easily, particularly if we start talking about street food in various countries around the world. And, you know, we can connect over that. And that's not going to have anything to do with your Christianity. And so with secular friends, for me, those types of connections were more genuine than, hey, did you go to prayer meeting? Did God come and touch you? You know, oh, you got so slain in the spirit. That was awesome. That was awesome. Isn't God great? Yeah, we've got to praise him. This is good. We're just got to push for, anyway. Pretty sure I can still turn it on if I wanted to pass as a Christian. So I've probably rambled a bit longer than I was hoping for this video. So I'm going to really quickly get on to the third point. And the third point is simply that my own personal morality was starting to strain under the crushing weight of the immoral and unethical positions that the Bible takes. I'm not sure how Christianity... Actually, no, I know. I was going to say I'm not sure how Christianity is going to be able to progress into the future, as a lot of its core tenets on things like sexuality and gender identity and, you know, things, I guess they're the main things at the moment, particularly with some of the stuff happening in Australia. The more that the church fails to catch up to society, I think the more it's going to be difficult for them to remain relevant. And I think that apologetics in terms of changing the Bible from, like I said before, some of it's literal, some of it's poetry, some of it's, you know, just there for narrative purposes. I think more and more some of the things that are problematic about particularly sexuality and gender identity, they're going to be reinterpreted into new doctrines that are potentially more inclusive, because I think that they're just not going to be able to maintain some of their hardline stances, particularly the more fundamental doctrines and denominations are. So my particular denomination was, like I said, I never thought of it as fundamental, but I do happen to know that I remember listening to preachers that would come and talk about their experiences after gay conversion therapy, where they were able to pray away the gay. And that was something that was celebrated and something that was seen as, you know, the power of God changing someone for the better. And I wasn't disgusted enough at that at the time. I think I felt like I was progressive at the time. And the reason I felt progressive is because I think I was a little bit less, I don't want to say less bigoted, because I don't want to dismiss or minimize the fact that I was not a good person when it came to thinking about those types of things when I was indoctrinated. But my grandma was lovely, and she was very inclusive, and she was probably, no, I'm not going to say probably, she was more progressive than me when it came to being open and inclusive of people that were in the LGBTQ or GRSM community. So I think that was probably a really strong point of positive influence that helped me to maintain a decent moral compass, or at least to be able to correct my compass in the fullness of time. I did struggle with the idea that, hate the sin, not the sinner. Although for a long time that phrase did a lot of work for me in terms of being able to justify, I don't hate you. I just think that, you've got to fix the fact that you like a gender that is not traditionally the gender that you should like according to my book. And I think that just got the best of me. There's a lot of shame, I guess, thinking about it and talking about it out loud, which I guess part of me doing these videos is a bit of, I don't want to say therapy because, no, I'm going to say it. It's a bit of therapy for me because I don't talk about this to anyone, because, the people in my life now are people that didn't share that part of my life. Even my wife, she has never known me as a religious person. I think her mum was quite happy when she found out I had gone to Bible college at some point and thought that she was going to get a good Catholic wedding for her daughter out of me. But that was not the case. We had a secular wedding last year. So, yeah. I couldn't deal with the immorality in the Bible as I became more progressive over time. And you know what? Full disclosure, when I was 17, I fantasized about a future where I was going to be a pastor of the church. I'd have a wife that would be at home. I'd be married by 21. Would have kids at 22 or 23. So we had like 1 year where we could just have sex and, not have to worry about kids because again, the whole abstinence thing, when you got married, because there was no sex before marriage, you wanted to make sure that, I planned time in to have that hot Christian married sex. And then start having kids. And that way, by the time I was 30, I'd have a couple of kids, I'd have a church, would be growing the church, the wife would stay at home. And that's horribly, horribly narrow-minded in terms of how to plan a life. Take away the career aspect of being a pastor and stuff, and that still applied to any other Christians that were at the church at the time that I was there, because there was a teaching that the man was the head of the house. And the more I think about this, the more content I guess I can put out there where I talk about this in more detail. That even churches that don't go hardline fundamental, they hide the fundamental aspect under layers of a facade of love and acceptance, but they teach this other doctrine that sort of slides in innocuously underneath. I think that's all I've got for you today. So to summarize, I guess those three things: reading the Bible holistically and getting an understanding of the book in its totality made it harder for me to believe it in certain areas. And the more areas you don't believe the Bible, the less evidence there is for the other areas of the Bible you believe. The people I didn't fit with, I didn't feel like I had a relationship with the community there that was meaningful in the same way that my secular friends were meaningful to me. And I found it really difficult to maintain this bigotry and hatred towards people. And I hope I've come a long way since then. And I've still even been learning things over the last couple of years that hopefully have made me a more tolerant and more inclusive person. They're the three things that got me out of Christianity, those feelings, and following those feelings and investigating those feelings and accepting those feelings. And I would urge you that if you're a theist and any one of these three things has actually struck a chord with you, that you think about it. Not that you pray on it, not that you ask God, but think about it yourself. Think about what it means to you to be asked to consider homosexuality a sin, or think about how you're seen by your peers, whether they see you for who you are and what makes you unique, or whether they see you for what you can provide to God's house and what you can do for God's plan, which is something that I think sounds noble if you've got that mindset, but I found a lot of freedom in being able to discard God's plan for my life and find my own plan. And also if you haven't already, think about the Bible more holistically. well, that's my TED Talk. Thank you for coming. And if you've got any comments, if any of this resonated to you, if you think anything is, anything that you had that really helped you to get on the path to being out of religion, or things that have kept you in religion, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. Please subscribe. I would love to see people subscribe and be notified when my new videos come out, because I want to try and get a video out every week. Here's my cat meowing. Hello, cat. And thank you. And I look forward to seeing you guys. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at vagabond_Sam. And I'll see you guys next time. Later. What was that? That was horrible. No, don't do the clicking later.